Hello, my name is Roy Poyan. I'm the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Fentanyl and Families in Harm's Way. Today we're going to look at the different roles family members play inside the family unit when substance use disorders is presented. It's an interesting science that we are looking at the roles and allows us to see but not label each individual in the family so we can better understand if they're assuming a certain role, this is how we can expect they will respond to an issue that is now coming up or is likely to present. So included in this dynamic of communication and relationship sharing within the family, we're looking at the brother, the sister, the mother, the father, and we're asking ourselves, what role is this person playing? Let's take a look at this dynamic for a brief minute and determine some of the things that we do see when we're talking about the characteristics of the family and how they are interacting with each other. Some of the known characteristics include, when it's substance use disorders, negativism, and that is played out maybe by all or some of the individual family members. There's a parental inconsistency. It's really hard to be consistent because each parent has their own way of looking at this, and for that matter, if it's inconsistent, kind of creates a problem for the overall family environment. There's parental denial. When denial is part of this family dynamic, that's considered actually part of enabling. So denial at the parent or other family members, you really want to be able to identify that and see what you can do, maybe some counseling or coaching to take them out of that. A miscarried expression of anger. I am just so angry at you for, being so inconsiderate and not coming home at this specific time. Well, that may be, you're really angry at the fact that they're misusing substances, but you're telling them that you're angry and you're overly angry over them missing a curfew. Because of its implications, it's really what you're angry about. So that miscarried, meaning carried into another topic or issue from what was really the issue that you're angry about, is part of that possible dynamic. Then we have self-medication. We do find that there are people in many ways that self-medicate their own angst and concerns in order for them to deal with what's taking place as a family member in a family with substance use disorders. And then finally, we look at unrealistic expectations of the parent or of the other family members about this person. In many cases, it's unrealistic that we find it because they don't understand that this is a disease of the brain, and they just don't see how they're not able to will themselves out of this, as though we were talking about not eating a jelly donut every day. With that in mind, it's different, and we will describe that in perfect detail in another episode. So when we mentioned to you that we're talking about certain roles family members play, let's identify what they are. There's the person who is misusing. They are actually playing a role inside the family dynamic. There is an enabler, a person who is enabling. There is possibly a hero, a person who basically becomes the outward representation or inward representation of what is good and right when everything else is going wrong. And that's what this person's kind of role is being assumed. And then you have the scapegoat. And that's often the person that sits there and says, well, I think I contributed to Jack drinking. I did this or I did that. Or actually the person may be, if you didn't do this, he wouldn't be doing that. And they make him the scapegoat for the behavior of the one that's either misbehaving or not contributing correctly. Then you look at the mastermind. This is a person who reads the tundra for what it is and figures out, how they can make this all work. And they're constantly thinking kind of in advance of each step, what can be done next. That's in the positive, sometimes in the negative, sometimes neutral. Then there's the mascot. This is a person who takes it upon themselves to show everybody else and internally what the family really is about. I represent the family in a way that's good, and we're dealing with this well, but really they know the opposite might be true, but they're considered kind of the mascot, the face of the family, as it might be, could be, but not always as it is. And then there's the lost child, and this lost child tends to go off to the side, in some cases isolate. They either do it in a noticeable way or they do it inside themselves, but they really can't find a way to help themselves to deal with what's going on, so they more or less withdraw. All of this is represented in kind of a sequence of thought, and when we're looking at the third learning objective, which is the sequence of thought, we're going to take kind of like an examination of, so how do we process what we know about what's happening in front of us? And that's typically, you take the person's role so that you understand why they're doing it, and then you determine what behavior are you seeing about this person, the mascot, let's say. So what behavior are you seeing the mascot is exhibiting, and how is that impacting the family? Now, these roles aren't necessarily negative, and it's not our job or our need to change that. If a person is a mascot, they're a mascot. Just so that you understand the behaviors. So why is my sister, who is not misusing but is being affected by this, why is she acting like this? I mean, she's acting like she's overdoing her homework, she's overdoing her social activities. She looks like a hero of all of us. She's championing things. That could be a very good thing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. And that's why we take the time to write down each person's name in a practical exercise and determine what it is that we're dealing with. But first we need to understand, with the paragraphs that are in the study guide, what each role is, the description of each role. Let's take a closer look at this. Why don't you join us at the family table, and we'll go through, what does this mean to you? What does this mean to your family? And how will you function knowing that these roles are there? So go ahead and grab your study guide, your seminar workbook, your 3D coping skills, and your connecting to local resources workbook. And let's sit down at the table, and we'll take a closer look together at this.
Well, here we are at the family table, and we have an opportunity to sit down and take a closer look at some of the issues that are involved in the different roles that family members play. So let's get started. We'll first start out, as we've done before, with the study guide. And inside the study guide are 3 learning objectives. And those include the 7 different types of family roles. And what we're pretty much doing is saying to ourselves, if now we are living in a different environment, and when substance use disorders is present, you are, it's helpful for us to know now what different roles each of our family members may be playing, and more than likely they are. And it's helpful because we can be more understanding of them. We can anticipate how they might respond to different issues, and there'll be many issues. So with this in mind, when we start to take a look at the different roles, and we'll go through them now, the substance misuser is playing a role, even though the whole focus seems to be around them, and they seem to be focusing on the drug. The family itself is more or less creating a circle of a dynamic where they respond to this person's behavior. We all respond to the behaviors of the different people in our families. And a lot of studies have been done in this area. So it's not so unknown. Matter of fact, it's almost predictable. As we pointed out, there is an enabler. And now is a good time for us to understand more clearly, so what do we mean by an enabler? There is a hero. And what do we mean when we say this person is acting as though they are the family hero? There is a scapegoat. This person is assuming and absorbing what are the problems of the family and is more or less playing the role of the scapegoat. And then there is the mastermind who's always thinking in advance. Then there is the mascot who tends to represent the family in its best light. Can you kind of see how these different roles are actually helpful? Because in a way, each part of what the family is kind of being represented. And then there is the lost child. Now, we don't want to say that if somebody is a scapegoat, you couldn't have another scapegoat because the scapegoat role is already taken. This isn't a role assignment for a theater play, but it could be that you have 2 or 3 scapegoats, is what I'm saying. And also, what the industry has pointed out is you may have several masterminds. People may fall into a role and then fall out of the role. It's all based on what we see, and that's what needs to be known by the family. In psychology, there really is an awful lot of things that we could do in terms of assessment by taking a blood test and saying, oh, we see this cursor in your blood, therefore you have. The way that psychology and family dynamics are done are by behavior, observed behavior, and then history. And so they take into a lot of what you might call soft information. It's not a hard number, but they are able to quantify it. So studies have been done in this area also, and they're very reliable. The question is, did you assign this person the correct role? And that comes from experience of knowing, so what behavior would you be looking for if this is the person and this is their role and this is what they're doing? Now, we want to caution you. You're not the role police. You don't want to go around and say, hey, Jerry, you're playing the role of a mascot. That's not going to be helpful. If you think that they're playing the role of a mascot, then just put that in your repertoire. And when they start acting like they're being the mascot of the family, you can be understanding. Yeah, that's probably the way I thought that this person would respond in this issue. See how that's helpful? If we're going to go to drug court, how is the mastermind going to handle that? And will it be different than the enabler? And will that be different than the lost child? Why is Donna not participating in drug court? Well, she's actually playing the role of the lost child. And there may be other reasons why, and we talked about some of those in the functionality and potentiality episode. So these episodes tend to come together, although they're not sequential. You could take one before the other, it'd be just fine. But by having viewed the first one, you can kind of see how it folds into this in terms of understanding more deeply, okay, we have a functionality and potentiality of this person and what they're capable of doing. By the way, they're also the lost child. So now, given that is the role that they're playing or are having or are doing in their behavior, what should our expectation be? Once again, we're talking about the family dynamic and how it's changed because of substance use disorders. And that is such an incredible traumatic experience for the family, you will find that it changes. So let's take a look at what the enabler is, the second one. I'm going to kind of read from the same material that you will be reading from in terms of the study guide and then the workbook. The enabler often looks like the caretaker. But we can identify, one similarity between the caretaker and the person who's actually enabling, and that's in their characteristics of their daily lives. We will take a look in just a minute about how this behavior presents itself. But when we start to look at the enabler at the same time, it's probably going to be a good idea to consider our seminar episode that talks about enabling versus consequences, because we do a deep dive into that topic because it's so prevalent. Then we're looking at the hero. The caretaker may make excuses for the person, or the enabler may make excuses for the person, but the hero is the one that does the best job in bringing the esteem of the family forward. So it may be that the enabler is protecting the family image, but it's the hero that sits there and says, and kind of like, I'm going to take time to talk to the principal of Jerry's school and make sure he understands we're a good family and we care and we're trying here. And so they take on that role, which can often be very helpful for the family. Then there is the person who is the scapegoat. And in being the scapegoat, it's defined in kind of a similar manner to what we will define as the problem child. They have a particular way of drawing attention to themselves in terms of, but if I was a part of Jerry's substance use, I will take part of the blame that he's now experiencing this disorder. Well, okay, or I gave him the keys to the car and he had an accident. So it's really, I'll take the hit on that. It's really my fault. I'll be the scapegoat for Jerry's behavior. And that's where the scapegoat kind of sits in the family dynamic and the way that this family system is functioning. So when we start to look at the mastermind, they're typically the person in the family who's thinking ahead of what's happening. Oh my gosh, okay, well, if he got arrested, that means we're going to court. So we want to make sure that he goes to drug court and not criminal court. So according to the seminar, the legal system, and that episode, which hopefully we've taken, we know that we should get an assessment so that we can give that to the prosecutor, so the prosecutor has the proper level of information to confidently recommend to the court system, we're going to prosecute them in drug court. They've got this as their assessment. I've got the documentation to prove it. What was the mastermind that was thinking in front and said, let's get that assessment from when he had one and get it over to the prosecutor? See, what the mastermind's doing is they're always thinking in advance. Now, that could be a good thing, or if they have nefarious intentions, that could be a not so good thing. So it could go. It's a double-edged sword. Now, with the mascot is somebody that, you know, says to the general public or within the family, hey, you know, we can get through this. We're a good family. We know what we're doing. We're taking these episodes so that we can improve ourselves and get in front of some of these issues that we're able to get in front of by learning more. And so you're turning around and actually identifying as a mascot what are the positive attributes of who we are and what people should expect as to the way we're conducting ourselves in this like trauma experience of dealing with substance use disorders in our family. So then we take a look at the lost child. And the lost child is somebody who kind of drifts off to the side and you just don't notice them as much. Let's face it, there's a lot going on at the family table in dealing with the substance use disordered person and the misuse and the characteristics and all the issues that they're bringing to the table. That it's easy to have a lost child. But in the sense of the lost child, the fact is that their behavior is characterized more by interaction rather of what they're not doing than rather the behavior of what they are doing. We'll see them not participating in certain roles or certain activities because they'd rather kind of like be off to the side. So with all of this in mind, we have a process called kind of a sequence of thought. And what ends up happening is the family member more or less takes on this role, often not knowing that that's what they're doing. And they start to behave in a certain way, which from our studies and empirically proven studies at that, we kind of know what that would look like, the behavior, and we will discuss that in the workbook section. And then we're going to take a look at the fact that we're impacted by this person playing this role that they've basically taken on. So now the question is, to what degree were we impacted? And this defines the new family system, okay? So the whole fabric of the family has changed based on the functionality and potentiality, based on the 7 different types of roles that are possibly intermixed and being played out. And now the family is starting to change itself. So with that in mind, being aware of that, if it feels different, it's because it is different. And that doesn't necessarily mean different is bad. Being aware of it is going to be very healthy for us to have. So now what we want to do is we want to take these learning objectives, the 7 different types of family members and the roles that they play, and we want to look at the workbook, and if you would go ahead and take that out, and we're going to go back into the different roles purposefully. And we're doing this because all we really did was we gave you an understanding of this is what happens. And that's just knowledge. What's more important for us is that you turn around and say, okay, well, what are we doing that we can identify with? And as you turn to those pages, you'll find that there's certain characteristics of interaction. I mean, isn't that what we're really talking about? And in your workbook, you're going to see that there are 6 characteristics. And I'll just kind of go through those briefly. There's parental inconsistency. Okay, that's one of the characteristic patterns that we see in a family that's experiencing substance use disorder. Hello? Parental inconsistency. It's extremely important that you identify what those inconsistencies are. Because what you're doing is you're now creating an environment for successful lifelong recovery. You are environmentalists now as a family system. And so everything that you contribute to this dynamic is going to create this environment. And these are the pains that you're taking while they're going through treatment and they're learning how to handle triggers in their life as now having this lifelong chronic disease. You as a family are sitting there saying, what changes do we need to make? Well, you won't know what those changes are until you start to take it apart. And that's what we're doing in these episodes. We're taking apart your family system so that you can identify it more clearly. And the end goal is that you've got an incredibly nurturing and healthy development of an environment for lifelong successful recovery in abstinence or sobriety. That's how you manage a chronic disease. That's how we manage diabetes. That's how we manage hypertension, COPD, CHF. All of these are chronic diseases that are lifelong, but we learn to live in our life with them. They don't define us, but we do learn to live our life with them. So miscarried expression of anger is another one. We got to be careful there. I mean, if we're mad about one thing and we carry that anger into a topic like, let's say we're really bothered by the fact that he got in an accident with his sister's car, and now I'm having to take this sister to work each day. And it's because of him and his darn addiction that this is happening to us. And then he breaks a curfew, and we just go off the deep end. It was over-exaggeration on the curfew. It was really miscarried anger. You were really angry about this car and the fact that you've got to now take time in your life to make sure that his sister is getting to work on time, which shouldn't be your responsibility. Remember, we talked about homeostasis. But this miscarried anger is actually being represented in how you responded to something that wasn't as serious, but with the same gravity, you're expressing the anger inside of that. So self-medication, beware. You as a family member who does not have the substance use disorder could start to self-medicate. And it's a way that, it's a coping skill. A lot of us use it. Just be careful when you start to see yourself doing that. If you need help, you've taken this episode, it's been brought up to you that this is possible as one of the interactions, you want to address it. And then unrealistic expectations. When you start to look at, what do I expect from Jerry, who's this person's brother? What do I expect from Donna, his sister? What do I expect from him, the one who's misusing. Unrealistic expectations create an imbalance. So as a practical exercise, let's go through each of the interactions and see if we are exhibiting any of those. This is kind of a self-health examination, and it's a valuable one. Okay, now we're going to take a look at, what are some of the things that happen with these different roles. And we're working into exercise number 2. And so now what we want to do is we want to say, in the substance user, what behavior are you observing that identifies with the fact that they are still misusing, okay, or are still in recovery? Look at them closely and say, what is the behavior that they are demonstrating? With the enabler, we want to do the same thing. We want to start to take a look at, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what are the common behaviors that are being demonstrated. But the questions we want to ask ourselves is, what actions are they taking that are creating enabling, okay? And then, do they blame themselves for the dependent suffering? I mean, there's a whole list of questions that you'll learn to ask in the enabling versus consequences episode, but these in general, for this exercise, you can certainly write down some of your observations, and those 2 questions really would help you to identify that this person's the enabler. And then when we take a look at the hero, despite the outward experiences, the hero suffers, and they have much strife in their life because they know that they're doing this extra work. A hero might be his sister's getting A's. His brother is just an absolute mess in his life, and it's created a mess in the family. But the sister is like overdoing her social outbound events and in sports, and the reason that she's overdoing it is because she's suffering inside, as the hero and as all of these members of our family are doing. They may be playing these roles, but that doesn't mean they're not experiencing significant dysfunction and an inability to know how to cope with each issue that comes up. So we want to be careful not to say, okay, well, she's playing the role of a hero as though it doesn't matter. She's playing the role of a hero because of this. And that's an indication that she needs to be nurtured and she needs to be understood, and something needs to be for her in terms of her balance and functionality. So when we start to look at the other ones, the scapegoat, and we start to identify with what are some of the common behaviors of the scapegoat, then we start to identify their dysfunctionality because it's misplaced blame. So with the scapegoat, they're accepting the fact that they're getting blamed for something that they didn't really participate in or do. But because they're playing this role, they're going to absorb that. Well, once again, this role is an indication that this person needs to be nurtured and understood. The fact that you are seeing this as a scapegoat is not a reason to sit there and say, okay, we've defined it, now let's move on. We want to make sure that this person's okay. And we can only do that by, getting a family therapist on board and having them a counselor. In all of these episodes, the end result is that you work with a professional in a family therapy, and that way you can identify this. All this material does for you is gets you started on the topic so that you can do a deeper understanding of what does this mean to us and our family. So the mastermind is the same way. And in the mastermind, they're often playing this dysfunctional role because they have to put a burden on themselves to think ahead of what is this condition and how is it impacting the family as a whole, as a system, and the family dynamic and the way that we kind of interact with each other. Then we want to take a look at the fact that there is the lost child. And this one is specifically important because it may be that they are also considering other dysfunctions like suicide. And I'm not saying that every lost child is thinking of suicide. That would be inappropriate to suggest that. But they may be thinking of harming themselves. They may be thinking, and the only reason that we're saying that is it's because characteristically for the lost child, they tend to isolate. And if they're isolating, then they don't have the interaction to purge what it is that they're experiencing or to get feedback on maybe a better way of handling it. What's my coping skill that I'm using here or not using here? So now that you've kind of taken a look at this, we've got a recommendation in the workbook that you view a particular presentation. And when we're doing that, we want to make sure that we take a look at what role each family member is playing. So in the workbook, we're saying, what role is the mother playing? What role is the father playing? And you'll put this down. Now, we had already said these roles may change over time. And with that in mind, you know, you're coming back to revisit this. It may be that they just go away altogether. But it's very rare that nobody's playing no role. And that's the nice thing about this science, is that that's probably not the case. Now, that's the workbook, and what we want to now take a look at is we understand from the study guide what the 7 different roles are for a family members. And now we have looked at in the seminar workbook, which is always the case, how does this impact our family? And then the third one is, what do we do about it? Okay, I mean, once again, it's nice to know these things, but we have to be able to put it into some formulation of, we want to get better about this and we're not quite sure where to start. Well, you do know where to start, okay? You do know to take a look at the different roles the family members play and to define exactly what each person might be doing in your family by who that person is. But then we want to take a look at, okay, well, so what are you going to do about it, not what it is that's taking place? Well, that's where we want to determine a solution, develop a decision, and design a plan of action. And at the end of this episode, you will find that we will go through each of those 3 coping skills for you. And in that way, you'll be able to more clearly understand and put into practice. That's the great thing about this. I mean, this whole process is so perfectly designed. It's not perfect, but it's perfectly designed for the purpose of helping the family say, hey, this is one of 32 things we're going to go through on our life journey with substance use disorders. And it's a value for us to take the time. We now know that there are roles that we are likely to play in this situation, meaning we're being stressed because of drug addiction is now a part of our family and will be for the rest of our lives. It doesn't go away. So with that in mind, we need to learn how to kind of function in it, around it, through it, and with it, but not let it necessarily define who we are. And by doing that, we're going to sit there and say, so how's it impacting us as it relates to the different roles family members are playing? And then we're going to sit there and take a look at, so what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to determine a solution for those things that need to be resolved. We're going to make a decision on how we're going to go about resolving that based on our solution, and we're going to write a plan so we can all contribute to what it is that we're going to do. Now, in this, we've said this before, you're not going to do this by yourself. Nobody does this by themselves. Matter of fact, one of the problems with families is that they're experiencing, they tend to isolate and they don't come out to attend education resources that will improve their skills in coping and handling. And those are found in the community. You will become a consumer of healthcare services in 3 areas regarding substance use disorders. The first being the addiction itself. You'll learn about all the services that are in your community and resources regarding their addiction and how that addiction affects your family system and dynamic. You'll also be doing an examination of the mental health industry. And in that regard, it's called a dual diagnosis. This person may actually have some type of mental health disorder, and that needs to be addressed in an almost isolated way, but in a duality with their addiction. The same would be true for their medical. When you abuse drugs, you're abusing your body. So it only stands to reason that the medical community may need to be involved in this. So now you've got to look at resources regarding the medical community. This gets really confusing. And so by putting these people down in a book and creating your own binder, it's going to be very helpful for you as you start to look back, because you can do this in advance, which is what we're doing today. We're taking a look at this at a time when you have the space and the mind and the capacity to start to take a look at it in a more holistic way. You're not in crisis mode, having to handle it on a timeline, under budget, and then gather together a collaboration of resources outside the family, cooperation within the family. There's a lot going on. And the sooner we can get to work here, the better off it's going to be when it's there. I want to thank you for taking the time to view this episode of the Different Roles Family Members Play. In Fentanyl and Families in Harm's Way, we seek to provide you with knowledge, because knowledge is empowerment. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? and kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved, and then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen. The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The 3 questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the 4th category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The 3 questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the 5th category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being, required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these 3 questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is. And now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your 5th sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go about using a model for creating a solution for any issue in life you have to face. you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine what are our values. Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decisions you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is, what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number one factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. Your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be, somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. Is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then, do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then, would you do this would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry, on all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made, based on the solution that you know you want to use, are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action. And we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.